How's it going today, guys? This is part 5 of my ongoing series where I talk to you guys about my first trip to Puerto Rico. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about my walk from the Earthship in Aguada to the airport in San Juan. And it was a pretty interesting one. I decided to walk the North Coast again to go home because, like I mentioned in a previous episode, I missed a lot of cemeteries on the North Coast during my first walk where I went from San Juan to the Earthship in Aguada. So I wanted to rectify that by doing a whole nother walk on the North Coast. Now I remember when I was leaving the day to start this journey and being nervous as usual because when I'm about to go on a big walk, my nerves are always on edge, and drinking a pot of coffee a day probably doesn't help. But I remember getting ready to leave and shaking Carlos's hand at the Earthship, and he gave me $50 for cleaning his shed, even though I didn't want to take the $50 because he helped me out so much. I just took it out of respect and went on my way, and I told myself that I was going to eat and drink good that day off of that $50. I was going to get a sorbet, and I was going to get a pizza, and I was going to go to Burger King a couple times to charge my phone and my battery, and I was going to get a new pair of shoes because funny thing about the situation I was in when I was leaving the Earthship for the final time during that trip, or at least I thought was the final time during that trip. The only pair of shoes I had left had holes on the bottom of them, so I could feel the road and stuff when I was walking. So I had to be pretty careful for a while because you never know what's going to be on the side of the road. Broken glass, dead iguanas, rocks, so on and so forth. So I remember leaving early that morning, and my goal was to make it to Isabella and sleep on the bench that I was used to sleeping on in Isabella. And I made it, and I had enough time to go to Walmart and buy a new pair of shoes, and I got something to eat and charged my phone and went to sleep knowing that I was going to have a long day ahead of me coming up. And from Isabella, I found myself in Quebradillas, and I really enjoyed spending time in Quebradillas. I think it's a really underrated city on the island, and I kind of missed it during my first walk on the North Coast because I was on the main highway so much at that point, just trying to get to the other side. I was happy to spend a little time there, and I went and filmed the cemetery in Quebradillas, and that is one of the biggest cemeteries that I've ever filmed. It was so packed and condensed, and it took me a long time. I was there for 4 or 5 hours recording that cemetery, and I'll never forget it. That's one that you guys should look up too on my YouTube channel. It's an older episode, but the Quebradillas cemetery episodes, they were really good. And I made it to a Burger King and charged my phone, and then I went and found something to eat, and then I barely made it to Camoy by nightfall. It was literally dark out when I was still on the main highway, and so that always gets a little sketchy for me. I really try to avoid that as much as possible, but I made it just in time to find somewhere to sleep. And it was kind of interesting. Once I got there and I found something to eat and charged my phone again and charged my battery again and whatnot, I decided just to go scope out the cemetery, even though it was dark. And I was walking around the cemetery there, and I found a couple benches literally right outside the cemetery. So that was a big score for me. So I decided I was going to spend the night on that bench. And just go film the cemetery early in the morning, because I also noticed that the gate to the cemetery was broken. So I knew I could just go in there early in the morning before anybody even shows up and film the cemetery. And it would be kind of new because I never have gotten to film a cemetery at sunrise before in Puerto Rico, because usually they don't open until 8, 9 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 10 o'clock. It varies, but none of them are open at sunrise. So I was laying there on that bench trying to sleep. I might have gotten 2 or 3 hours of sleep, but not much. A funny little side note about when I was sleeping on that bench outside of the cemetery is the ambulance came by and asked me if I was okay. And I started laughing and told him, yeah, I'm just walking the north coast of the island. I'm fine. If I can go back in time, I would have asked him for something. Like, oh, actually, I'm not okay. I'm really hungry. I need some orange juice and a burger. Can you guys help me out? And I bet you they would have done something for me, but no, I didn't need anything. I was just fine. I had a loaf of bread and some peanut butter and jelly in my bag, so I always had something to eat whenever I needed a snack. So I got up early that morning, right before sunrise, and got my camera ready, and I filmed the cemetery as the sun was coming up. And that was one of my favorite episodes that I've ever made on my YouTube channel. You can just type in No Name Explorations Quemoy Cemetery, and you can check it out. I think it's one of the highest viewed Puerto Rico cemetery episodes on my channel, for good reason. And that really boosted my morale after I got done filming that cemetery. And then I marched to Hatillo because I wanted to film and photograph the cemetery there as well, but I also wanted to see if I gotten any better from all the other walks that I've taken, and I wanted to see if I can have a better sleep in Hatillo than I did on my first walk down the north coast. And I found a bench and crashed out, and I ended up doing a lot better in Hatillo the second time than I did the first time. So I woke up and I filmed and photographed the cemetery there, and then I found my way to Arecibo. And that was a long walk that day. I'll never forget that day. And I finally made it there, and I went to my favorite pizza place and had another pizza, and I didn't want to go back to the same gym that gave me a free shower on my first walk and try to get another free shower. So I just paid for one at the gym that's right next to the pizza place there. And then I went and slept on my favorite bench of all time out there on the island and had a really good sleep. I got about 5.5 hours of sleep, so that's how you know you've got a good bench out there, when you're getting 5.5 hours of sleep. And the next morning I got up and just went and visited the cemetery there again, because they have a really nice cemetery. And I left. So I walked to Barceloneta and started scoping the area out. Because of the terrain of the place, it made the town kind of was forced to be built kind of weird. So usually when I find these concrete bus stop benches that I sleep on, I try to stay more in town. And of course, there's still bus stop benches that are more in the residential areas, but I usually try to stay away from a bench if it's like in somebody's neighborhood. And the only bench I could find was one that was in this residential neighborhood. So I was kind of sketched out about it, and I didn't know if I was going to end up sleeping there or not. And I just decided, hey, I'll go film and photograph the cemetery, and then afterwards I'll see how I feel. So I went to the cemetery, and needless to say, I got ran out of there pretty quick. A couple workers came up to me, and they looked more like security guards than people that worked at a cemetery. And I ended up getting ran out of there, and I wasn't explaining to them what I was trying to do very well, so it's my fault too. And after I got ran out, I just decided, you know what? I'll just head to the next town. I'll try to get to a Hatio before it gets dark. And I regret that decision now, but when I go back to Puerto Rico next year and walk the North Coast again, I'm going to go back to the town, and I'm going to talk to the mayor, and I'm going to get in there, and I'm going to film and photograph that cemetery, because it's still an important part of the cemetery collection that I'm working on. So I made it to Manatee just before it got dark, and Manatee was one of my favorite cities that I was able to go to and see on the island of Puerto Rico. And I think it's a very underrated place, and I missed it the first time because, like I said, I was really focused on getting distance during my first walk, and I walked completely by it using the main highway and completely bypassed it. And when I got to Manatee, that's when I realized I made the right choice, walking the North Coast again and visiting these places that I missed the first time. I ended up sleeping at the plaza in Manatee, and they have a really nice plaza, so I didn't have to go look for a bench. And that's when I really realized too that, wow, I could sleep at these plazas as well. They're very comfortable, they're public, there's always benches and places to sit. A plaza is a great place to lay my head, and I should have realized that after my experiences in San German, but sometimes things take time with me. So I was laying at the plaza right across the street from these old abandoned ruins, and I don't know what they were called, but I went and checked them out too, and they were pretty awesome. I just remember just being really excited to be in the town, and I felt a lot safer than I did in most other places in Puerto Rico. And to be honest with you, I felt safe most of the time in Puerto Rico. So this place just felt extra safe. And I remember just walking around for a couple hours at nighttime, just up and down the neighborhoods and walking through town. And I really got to enjoy that place. And the next morning I woke up and I found something to eat and got a cup of coffee and charged my phone, and I went to the Manatee Cemetery, and that was a special one. You guys should look that up on my YouTube channel as well. It's an older episode, but it was a really amazing cemetery, and I just talked to the person that was running it, and he was cool with me going in there and taking photographs and stuff. So it was just a really chill, lax, comfortable day. Those are my favorite days of cemetery filming, when I talk to the person that's running the cemetery and they don't care that I'm there taking pictures, and so there's no extra stress on my shoulders of somebody coming and approaching me or confronting me. I can just relax and focus on doing what I like to do. So from Manatee, I continued my quest by walking to Vega Baja. And on my way to Vega Baja, I was thinking pretty deeply about what I was going to do, because although I was running really low on cash, and I know I didn't have very many options left, I was debating on whether or not I was going to sneak down to Vega Alta on my way to San Juan and photograph and film that cemetery too, but I wasn't quite sure yet. And on my way to Vega Baja, I'll never forget this. Somebody that must have seen me on the road previously or knew what I was doing. Maybe it was this person I talked to at a McDonald's. So you see, I went to this McDonald's, and I remember it was just a really great experience. I walked to the McDonald's that was kind of in between Manatee and Vega Baja, and I ended up talking to this homeless guy, and I gave him $5 and told him to get a coffee and, something to eat on me, and I wished him well, and we had a pretty good conversation. And then I went into the McDonald's and sat down, and one of the workers came up to me and he said, "Hey, if you don't mind me asking, what are you doing?" And I told him what I was doing, and I showed him my YouTube channel, and I believe he subscribed. And I think it was him, actually, that later on in the day pulled over on the side of the highway and actually gave me $100 to continue my journey. And I'm not positive if it was him or not, but whoever did that, I'll never forget that. That was one of my best memories of all time on the island. I remember just standing there shocked for a while because I just couldn't believe that somebody just pulled over on the side of the road and gave me $100 bill. And it turns out I really needed that $100 bill. I needed every dollar that I had on that trip. It actually is pretty crazy how much that $100 was just like a complete and absolute blessing for me. Needless to say, that $100 inspired my decision to walk to Vega Alta instead of just heading towards San Juan. And I saw that as a little side quest, which I'm glad that I did, because the cemetery in Vega Alta is also one of my favorite cemeteries of all time. I got there and filmed it right after a nice rainstorm, so everything was wet, and it just gave the cemetery a whole different look. And I was glad to be able to photograph and film it. And I found a pretty cool bench that was literally like right next to the highway that went through the town. And I got to spend an hour or two walking around and just checking it out. And of course, I went and charged my phone and did all that. And it was really worth it. And I'm glad I went to Vega Alta. And so then I knew that my journey was coming close to an end. So I began walking towards Bayamon. And that's when things got crazy, because I walked for about 9.5 hours, and I ended up making it into Bayamon. And it was just one of those instances that, sometimes this happens in Puerto Rico, the power will go out and all the street lights in this area of Bayamon that I was walking through stopped working. And it made it really hard for me to cross the road and stuff because traffic was confused. And it was, if you haven't been to Bayamon before, it's already packed and pretty wild as it is when everything's functioning properly. There's a lot of people, a lot of hustle and bustle. There's a lot of stuff going on in Bayamon. And when the traffic lights stopped working, it created chaos. And eventually in some areas, like, cops showed up and like started directing traffic or whatever, or like a citizen would get out of his car and start, trying to direct the traffic the best he could because, yeah, the stoplights weren't working. But that made it a lot harder for me to get through the area, like I said. So I just walked for hours and hours and hours, and I finally limped into the airport in San Juan, and I was ready to buy my ticket. And like I told you guys in previous episodes talking about this trip, I was very inexperienced as a traveler, so I figured I would show up to the airport, get a ticket, and they would be about as expensive as they are online, and I'd fly out of there. I had, $700 left in my checking account, and I had a little bit of cash on me. I figured everything would be good to go. And unfortunately, the only flight that they had available that day was like $1,200, so I couldn't even afford it. So I was like, well, damn, what am I going to do? So I sat in the airport for a while and I bought a ticket for, $300, $400, but it was 8 days away. And that was the cheapest flight I could find. So I was like, well, what am I going to do being stuck here in San Juan for that long? And I went and talked to him a little bit more, and I remembered that my friends, when they left San Juan and went to Isabela during my first walk from San Juan to Isabela, they flew on like a little plane that you can get a ticket for at the airport. And I went and talked to the lady at the airport about that, and it just so happened that there was a flight that was leaving pretty soon that day, and there was one seat left, and the ticket was like $97. So I pulled out that $100 bill that guy gave me when I was walking to Vega Baja, and that really saved my skin because I was able to fly back to Isabela, and my friends came and picked me up, and I just stayed at the Earthship and waited until my flight date, and then I got a ride back to San Juan and I flew home. So I just barely made it out of there with almost no money. And it was pretty funny too, because I remember checking my bank account when I made it back to Spokane, and I had a couple dollars in my pocket, enough for a coffee to drink and I had 58 cents left in my bank account. So I had 58 cents and $3 for a coffee. So I made it that close. I cut everything that close. Like I said, I would have really been in a bind if I wouldn't have gotten that $100. So I really appreciate that person and their act of kindness for giving me that $100. Well, that concludes this episode. I got one more episode for you guys regarding my first trip to Puerto Rico. And then I'm going to be starting my next series where I'm going to be telling you guys about my second trip in Puerto Rico. So stay tuned. Thanks for listening.